Who is the worst attention you've come across? This girl I knew was the literal definition of attention seeking. She would always show off and always have to mention how much money and influence she and her family had, and then in the same breath would try to convince you she was from the hood. She wasn't. She was literally from the richest area in my city where higher level politicians and famous people live. She would constantly be extremely dramatic and say really disgusting things to get a rise out of people. She'd make really outlandish comments about different races, religions, poor people, the homeless, etc. She voted for Trump simply because she wanted to get a reaction from people. She was the kind of person who needed to one-up literally everyone. If you had a chronic illness, so did she, and it was so much worse than yours. Bad upbringing? Hers was worse. A tragic loss? Nothing compared to what she went through. Had some incredible news? Sucks to suck because hers was better. Her roommate was having some serious mental health issues and she somehow managed to make it about her and her safety and vilify the poor girl instead of actively helping her seek treatment. She would get drunk and act like a crazy fool, flailing her arms and being loud and provocative just so people would watch her. She'd make out with all our mutuals, who'd she refer to as her sons. Gross. Just to stir up drama. She would steal things from people's houses at a party, put it on Snapchat, and then when she was caught would delete it and act like it never happened and then play the victim. She lied to everyone about hooking up with a mutual friend of ours. She's lost a lot of friends in the past year or two, myself included, because we can't deal with her dramatics and attention-seeking ways anymore. I'm trying to be as non-descriptive as I can because a lot of the things she did are very specific, but this is just some of the stuff she's done. If I listed everything, we'd be here all day. My ex's niece, who still lived at home with her parents, pretended she was pregnant at 16. The really freaked up part was that her stomach grew for the full 9 months of her pregnancy. She told everyone that she was uncomfortable with anyone touching her stomach, and she was happy to wear tight clothes that would accentuate her bump. She had everyone convinced the pregnancy was real. Her parents ended up spending a fortune buying a pram, cot, and clothes, etc. Eventually, when the baby didn't appear and her parents discovered the truth, they just never mentioned the pregnancy or baby ever again to anyone. I'm sure they went ape crap at her behind closed doors, but she effectively got away with it because no one else either within or out with the family ever mentioned it again to her. For whatever stupid reason, one day shortly after her supposed due date, I went round to visit her when her parents were at work. I asked her where the baby was. After initially looking at me sheepishly and ascertaining that I hadn't heard anything from my mother-in-law, her gran, she went on to tell me this elaborate story about how her waters broke on the living room couch, that her mom rushed her to hospital, and after a long labor she gave birth to her son. Can't remember what she called this figment of her imagination. Anyway, she went on to tell me that he was in hospital being monitored as he was a little small, but he was doing well and she visited him every day. I didn't, still don't, like confrontation, so I never called her out on her BS and never revisited that conversation again, and nor did she. She really ought to have been in some form of counseling, as no one in their right mind would ever do something even remotely similar to that, but she never did. She grew up and went on to have 4 real pregnancies, but has never worked a day in her life and is altogether a pretty shite ma'am. I had a girl in my class which kept telling lies to make her seem more badass or that she would be living the best life. She always told everybody that she was living on top of a mountain and had to go like 5 kilometers to school every morning by foot. I was actually friends with her, so I went to her house once and she was living in an apartment which was in an alleyway filled with drunkards. She also said that she was part of some group that were basically freelancers and that she would do life-threatening tasks every day. But she also said that it would have to stay a secret, even though she basically just screamed it around the whole school. Overall, her stories about that group had so many cliches, like that they had a member which was a 12-year-old who went freaking berserk every time he saw blood because his parents were killed in front of him, and that they had some 12-year-old scientist who apparently built some sort of gun that they'd use on the berserk kid to calm him down. She also said that she had a rival or something because apparently she kept getting followed by a dude that knew her code name, but every time she chased him he would apparently jump on a freaking roof and run off. The stories also had a lot of logic failures. She once told that the group was building gliders for forest missions to jump from tree to tree easier, even though the gliders would be way too wide and they'd just break the wings because it would collide with every possible tree. Once she also told us that the group would have a 12-year-old member that for some reason had access to guns and that he shot a fist-sized hole through her wrist during a training session. She apparently didn't even get medical treatment but instead just put a bandage around half of her arm. But in school she was able to move her arm completely normal and there were never any traces of a wound, not even some blood or something. So nobody ever believed her and she became the most hated of the class. At the end of the year she had to leave the school because her grades were too bad and she kept telling that it was just because of French and that she would have the best grades of everybody. Even though the truth was that she had a D in almost every class and even multiple E's, which can make you leave the school. And here in Germany, by the way, she was also just 12 years old. Sounds like she watched too much anime. My ex. When I told a friend to go check up on her because she kept posting suicidal crap on her IG story, she immediately said I was stalking her. Bro, I literally just checked on you. Calm the frick down, LMAO. This was after the shooting in Parkland, FL. If you recall, this is what sparked many students across many schools do walkouts to speak up against gun violence. My school did one about a few weeks after it happened. The walkout was optional for students but many joined. Since the walkout was planned, some students could sign up to give speeches about the tragedy, gun violence, etc. There was this one girl, who everyone knew craved attention, but what she did crossed the line for pretty much everyone. She gave a heartfelt speech of how she was texting a friend in Parkland who just so happened to be a victim and was fatally wounded. She cried during the whole thing. Everyone was sympathetic towards her. However, there were some skeptics who wanted to fact-check her speech. They looked up the victims of Parkland. Sure enough, the friend she said was a victim didn't even exist. She got exposed. People got peed. I don't think the administration took any action though. It's disappointing how people will do anything to get attention. A girl I know is always sick with something or other. She is also always whinging about how the surgeons tell her she doesn't need operations. She persists though until she gets them. It's not a pain pill thing. Purely attention. All she talks about is how terrible hers is and she can't work because of it. Then a month later we never hear about the first problem again and she now has ABC. She's managed to get 2 shoulder operations, a knee reco and an endo-op. Surprise surprise, the surgeons said she looked fine when they opened her up and she's never complained about those things ever again and now has other things too wrong which conveniently only affect her when she wants something. I work with one of those. She was always complaining about how bad her endometriosis is, until she figured out I actually have it, and now she has IBS. My aunt deliberately lost her benefits card to a grocery store just to scream about it to other customers and get the cashier fired because she was feeling lonely that her husband wouldn't get her a new dog. Your aunt is freaking nuts. My mother. My hubby's aunt was her best friend. Small town. And one day my hubby's uncle died. At the same time my mum was officially splitting from her ex. She'd moved out about 10 months prior, so their relationship had been all but over for a while, but her ex was now seeing another woman and my mum was suddenly devastated. Not even 48 hours after the uncle's death, my mother-in-law came to town to support the aunt, her sister, and she ran into my mother at the shop. My mother burst into tears and my mill assumed it was because of the uncle's death. But no, my mum said, "Have you seen Aunt? I wanted her to meet me for lunch. You won't believe what X is doing and saying about me. I need a friend." Mill had never had a bad thing to say about my mum up until then, but she told me what happened and I had to call my mum and remind her that we'd all been listening to her relationship drama and supporting her for months, and can she just let Aunt and everyone mourn for a bit. The aunt and uncle were very well known in town and my mum has always loved drama, so I know she hated not having the attention on her. I was so embarrassed. So far, the worst attention seeker I've encountered is a girl in my class. She goes out of her way to cause drama with both students and teachers, purely for her own entertainment. It's so ridiculous and gets really over the top most of the time. The most memorable drama she's caused in my eyes is with a substitute teacher in Italian. She rarely pays attention in class and often ignores instructions from my normal teacher, so this is pretty predictable. She had her phone out, and of course, that day we had probably one of the most grumpy and strict teachers I've ever met. She refused to hand over her phone and did some extreme talking back. The teacher got so mad that she threatened a detention and a plethora of other punishments. But even when she was sent to rethink, the title is self-explanatory, she refused. She left the class and came back repeatedly. It was one of the most frustrating things I've ever witnessed. Quite surprisingly, she got away with a lunch detention, even after talking back, refusing to leave, arguing to her teacher and causing drama. I had a very good friend that was an attentionaholic. He left on summer vacation to visit his family in Vermont. We were in the 10th grade. I call him a few weeks into his trip just to catch up and see how it is out there. He says pretty good. I donated my liver to my dying grandmother 2 days ago. As a thank you, my grandpa bought me a dirt bike. I said, cool lol, if you bring it back we can ride together. He replied, I can't, I already wrecked it and it's in the shop. Knew a girl in high school that claimed to have did. So you never knew who you were talking to. It was literally a that wasn't me, that was Patricia situation. We all knew she was faking because there was always holes in her stories. Mixing up details with the different personalities on top of a new character every week to blame her actions on. We just gave her the benefit of the doubt. 10 years later she never mentions any of them again. Oh yeah, and she told me she as a 10th grader got paid to train horses to do tricks for like circus crap. Then forgot about it the next day I brought it up. As an cringy ex-horse general, this one was the worst lie of all. I know a kid who faked terminal brain cancer. He posted on Facebook about his cancer. Everyone in school thought he had cancer, even his closest friends. He was living in a friend's house whose family bent over backwards for him. He tried to take his own life unsuccessfully, and while in the hospital the friend checked his laptop, I guess for a note or something, or maybe he outed himself, and it was just full of searches about how to fake cancer. I just feel so sorry for everyone involved in that situation. A former friend had a hissy fit because I wouldn't go outside at midnight to go see her new hairdo. She wrote bad crap about me on Facebook and sent my boyfriend private messages slagging me off. When I did see her a few days later and she asked me what I thought about her hair, I was forced to ask what was different because it looked exactly the same as it had the last time I saw her. She basically went to the hairdressers every 2 weeks to have her roots done, and I was supposed to have been interested enough in her vanity to actually notice something happening on the top of her head. The girl used to wear not one but 2 padded bras at the same time, used to get up 3 hours before work to do her hair, makeup and nails, and she was a BT engineer installing wires, so she would spend half her day gluing her nails back on. My absolute favorite though is she once put fake tan on right before going to a wedding and wore a white dress too, but the tan soaked through the material, so by the time she got there both her and her dress just looked really dirty. Was absolutely hilarious. Girl was a dirty smelly cokehead, but she thought she was God's gift. My sister came out as a vegetarian during a dinner with extended family at a steakhouse. This dinner had been semi-regular for years. Same sister brought her home-hewn crafts to the family dinner the evening before my wedding to show off. That one's on film. The day of the actual wedding, she snapped off a chunk of my hair while using a curling iron. Note, she's a licensed hairdresser, and spent the reception wailing about how I was getting married first. We were both well under 25, and she took another 9 years to meet a decent fellow anyway. This girl I know would trip and would make a big scene about it. She would even overdo tripping and then say, "Wow, no one saw that." Then talk about how no one in our town likes her and that the only time people talk to her is when they need her help. I worked with a crazy Mormon girl who was an aspiring actress. She claimed to be epileptic and would fake passing out in front of groups of people and them eventually come to. She wouldn't really seize, just faint. Always made me smile how she'd roll her eyes before she dropped and always managed to fall safely. Ex-friend of mine. I get migraines a lot. My ex-friend, let's call her L, invited us over for a BBQ. We're sitting out back, and she's telling me all about being in bed all day with a migraine. Poor me. She was sitting right beside the thumping stereo, under the twinkling sparkly lights, with a house full of guests, and got drunk as frick that night. This wasn't the first time she pulled the migraine card for no apparent reason. That was the last time I went to her place. Me ex-friend pretended to be our pet 8 times, lied about being physically abused. I caught her out in that one, and then she admitted it. She even made me watch when she smashed her knee with a freaking hammer so she could get to cast and see the physiotherapist who she was in love with. That stuff isn't even the worst of what she has done. She's unfortunately very sick and her family refused to get her help. I feel very bad for her because I first met her when they could have prevented that and helped her get better with professional help. This girl in my high school was probably the biggest one I have ever met. She got her attention from lots of things, but injuries were her the most annoying. I remember one time she supposedly hurt her foot or something. Complained 4 weeks only did sports that suited her, and then when we asked if she was getting a moon boot she said she was but it got lost in the mail or something like that. Well, she never got that moon boot, but someone else who was actually hurt came to school in one and she said that she's probably rebroken her foot and might need a new boot. One time she also obviously was craving attention and lied that her parents had recently divorced and went around telling anyone who would listen. Well, my stepdad worked with her dad and turns out they were still happy together. School got involved and her parents wanted her to get some counseling. She also lied that her mum broke her arm, but she got her stories mixed up and said her mum also went to work the day after the crash. I actually felt sorry for her having to need that much attention, and you would never know if she was telling the truth. During middle school, I knew a guy whose older brother passed away in the Virginia Tech massacre. Everyone felt awful for him. Over the course of that year, he became incredibly popular. All of the popular kids and girls were all over him. He got tons of attention. But the year after that the school basically forgot and he was back to where he was. Then he started lying and using his own brother's death to try and regain attention. He was lying saying that the Jonas Brothers were visiting him and giving him a guitar because he lost his brother in the massacre. Once people found out he was lying, he became one of the most hated people in school. He continued to lie in similar ways, but people stopped taking him seriously. Fast forward to a couple years ago and it turns out he disappeared after he was super depressed. Rumor has it that he was seen on a security cam in a Florida airport, but who knows. A coworker of mine. Try to tell him anything and he is ready to bounce back with a "me too." This happened to me too and I end up listening to his version of the story. It's annoying to talk to someone who never listens but only hears to remember a similar thing happening to him. No sympathy, no empathy, nothing whatsoever. There was this girl in my Discord server that would lie about pretty much everything. Small things like height, age, breast size, and big things like intercourse. She's 14. RP, abuse, living in poverty, etc. How do I know this? She simply doesn't know how to lie and contradicts herself all the time. She also admits it when called out. That one dude in class that pretends he doesn't know something entirely and then proceeds to say the thing with complete accuracy just to show off. Some guy in high school faked his death to see how people would react. I don't know all the details, because we weren't on speaking terms, but I know he had his girlfriend tell everyone, parents included, that he had an accident and he died. I remember seeing his parents at school the next day and they were devastated. Then he showed up 2 days later or so. Surprised people were not more excited to see him. I briefly dated a girl who told me she ate a bottle of pills and pretended to be out of it and made me promise I wouldn't call 911 to see how I'd react. I made her throw up and then MacJavid open a semi-used water filter and made her eat the activated charcoal. She refused at first, but I told her it was either that or I had to call for paramedics. I put dated in quotes because we just fricked and lived together briefly until I discovered how insane she was. The same girl threatened to crash the car into the retaining wall while we both were in the car going 70 miles per hour down the highway. Those girls on Snapchat who have a fight W someone and post a black screen W an emotional emoji filled caption, and if anyone checks on them they say they don't wanna talk at it. Girl in the same section as me would fake panic attacks whenever something mildly inconvenient happened. She also would laugh out loud obnoxiously in order to get people to look at her. Not only that, but she would make rumors of guys liking her in order to attack them in front of everyone. Sadly, was one of those guys. The sister of someone I used to be friends with died in the Manchester bombings, and there was this one girl we all went to school with that made it all about her. She made out like it was her sister that died, constantly posting things on Facebook and generally making it all about herself. And she hadn't even been close friends with her. She just knew her through others and met her like once. And at the funeral she decided to tell everyone about the guy whose sister died, sent nudes to her and loads of other inappropriate things that you shouldn't talk about with others, never mind at a funeral. She just begs attention constantly. I've never known anyone like her. Had this classmate in primary school who was an absolute diva. He would sashay into class and act like he was the boss, dictate who sat where, and just aggressively hit on the popular guys in class. He was our teacher's nephew and thought that entitled him to authority in the classroom. He was well behaved around parents and teachers, but to a lot of us he was an all-around headache. I was enemy number one just cause I was well liked and I could sing a couple notes higher than he could. He made it his mission to see me die socially. If I got good grades, he accuses me of cheating. If I had a little extra money for recess, he'd buy a whole bunch of snacks just so I couldn't actually get anything. All the while he flaunted how rich he was, how smart he was, how he didn't stink like I did. Funny how one bad day with diarrhea can just stick with you all your primary school life. I snapped when he told the class that he had seen me snogging my younger sister, calling me a sick pervert. How that is probably how my family is. How dare we call ourselves Christians? He stopped when his desk missed him by inches and hit the blackboard instead. I once met this woman my boyfriend knew, let's call her Karen, because she was a Karen, who lives in the same small village I do. My BF had already told me she was always talking about her father dying and crying about how terrible it had been. I don't want to police other people's grief, but this woman was in her 50s and the man had died a very old, very senile, but very happy man. When I first talked to her she immediately started with me about the difficult time she had had, because around the same time her father had passed. One of her closest friends died of cancer and it was just so horrible and traumatizing to watch her suffer like that. Karen was crying how she had been by her friend's side every step of the way, because the family was just too struck with grief to care for her. Apparently the friend had begged this woman to think of herself, because she could see how exhausted Karen was. But Karen insisted on being there for her friend and taking care of her every need. Then she ended her sob story with, "You're so lucky to be young and not have to deal with this type of stuff yet. It really takes a toll, you know." I did in fact know, because the close friend she was describing was my mother. I had never seen or met this woman in my life. When I responded, "That's strange. I distinctly remember my dad being a full-time caretaker for her and never having seen you in my life. But maybe I'm just too grief-stricken to remember correctly." She at least had the decency to be very embarrassed. But seriously, that just grossed me out so much that she heard about this awful thing that happened to someone she maybe sometimes chatted with in the supermarket, and immediately saw opportunity to get sympathy and attention for herself. She still can't look me in the eye, so there's that. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.